When we talk about the American frontier, we talk about grizzly bears. We talk about hostile encounters. We talk about hunger and disease. But this is what the records actually show. Most men did not die because of animals or enemies. They died because winter arrived before they were ready. This is not a story about survival. It is the story of a force that did not need to act. It only had to wait. The Little Ice Age. Between approximately 1300 and 1850, the Northern Hemisphere experienced what scientists now call the Little Ice Age. It was a period of significant climatic cooling, documented by multiple sources: tree ring analysis, ice core samples, and thousands of historical records. According to research published in Geophysical Research Letters in 2009, average temperatures in North America during the coldest periods of the Little Ice Age were 1 to 2 degrees Celsius below the 20th century average. That may not sound like much, but it meant growing seasons 3 to 4 weeks shorter, snow accumulation 20 to 30% greater in mountainous regions, rivers freezing that rarely froze before, and storms occurring outside normal seasonal patterns. The coldest periods occurred in 3 distinct phases: 1650 to 1670, 1770 to 1790, and 1810 to 1850. And that last phase? It was exactly when the MountainMen pushed into the Rocky Mountains. Climatologist Brian Fagan, in The Little Ice Age, wrote that the early 19th century recorded some of the coldest winters in hundreds of years of historical records. The men moving west had no idea they were living through a climatic anomaly. They only knew that the winters described by their grandfathers seemed unbelievably mild compared to what they were facing, and they died because of it. Documented winters that brought everything to a halt. Let me give you concrete, documented examples. The winter of 1830 to 1831, often remembered as the Winter of the Deep Snow, is widely recorded in pioneer diaries, newspapers, and meteorological records. In Illinois, snow began falling on December 30th, 1830, and continued with few interruptions until the end of February. In the central part of the state, 3 to 4 feet of continuous snow were recorded. In the south, 2 to 3 feet, and snowdrifts in open areas reached 10 to 15 feet. The Sangamo Journal of Springfield, Illinois, in February 1831, reported that snow was 3 feet deep on level ground. Travel was completely suspended, and the mail had not arrived for 3 weeks. 3 weeks without mail meant 3 weeks without news, without supplies, without communication. On the frontier, that was an eternity. Pioneer William Oliver wrote, "In 8 months in Illinois, that deer died by the hundreds, livestock died standing in the fields, and men who went out to check the herds were found frozen within sight of their own homes." Then came the winter of 1836 to 1837, when the Mississippi froze. That winter is one of the best documented climatic events of the 19th century because it disrupted commerce on a massive scale. Temperature records from St. Louis show an average of 7 degrees Fahrenheit in January 1837, with a recorded low of -22 degrees on January 8th. The Mississippi River froze solid from St. Louis to Memphis for 6 weeks. Trading Post records from Fort Union on the Missouri River show that expected shipments of gunpowder, beaver traps, and winter provisions were not received because the river was impassable. When those supplies did not arrive, trappers were left with nearly exhausted ammunition, worn equipment, little food, and nothing to trade. The Arkansas Gazette, on February 7, 1837, wrote that the winter exceeded in severity anything remembered by the oldest inhabitants, and that teams crossed the Mississippi on the ice while navigation was completely suspended. And here is the crucial connection. If you were a trapper in the Rockies, you would know none of this until spring. You would only know that your supplies never arrived. and by that point it was already too late to do anything. The winter of 1842 to 1843 brought a different kind of disaster in the Sierra Nevada. The expedition of Joseph B. Childs and Joseph Walker encountered extreme snow conditions while crossing the range. Snow depth at the pass was estimated at 8 to 12 feet. Temperatures remained below 15 degrees Fahrenheit for 3 weeks, and the group was trapped for 23 days before retreating. Joseph Childs wrote that the snow was so deep the horses could not move. Animals were abandoned. The men were exhausted from breaking trail, and on December 3rd they decided to turn back because continuing would be suicide. This was 4 years before the Donner Party tragedy. The difference is that Childs turned back. He recognized that the conditions were impossible. The expedition lost animals, supplies, and nearly a month of travel, but survived because it chose to retreat. And nameless blizzards, personal records. Now we enter darker territory. The storms that have names are the ones we remember, but the deadliest ones have no names. They exist only in personal accounts. Osborne Russell, Journal of a Trapper, February 1837. On the 14th, a violent snowstorm commenced at dawn, accompanied by high winds which continued until midnight. The next morning, the snow was 3 feet deep and still falling. On the 15th, we killed a cow elk found mired in the snow near camp. It was fortunate, as we had nothing to eat. On the 16th, it continued snowing. One of our horses died. The snow is now 4 feet deep. On the 17th, we dug a cave in a snowbank on the south side of a large pine and moved into it, as the tent had been carried away by the wind. We have barely enough wood to keep from freezing. On the 22nd, we left camp. We found 2 trappers from a camp 6 miles distant, frozen to death. They had apparently attempted to reach us during the storm. 6 miles. In normal conditions, a 2-hour walk. In that storm, it was a death sentence. Russell never recorded their names. They are simply 2 trappers. Warren Angus Ferris, Life in the Rocky Mountains, winter of 1831. On January 6, 1831, the thermometer stood at 32 degrees below zero. Several men suffer severely from frozen extremities. On January 10th, Joseph Palmer died during the night. We could not dig a grave. The ground is frozen to an unknown depth. We placed the body in a snow cave and marked the spot. He died from what we believe was cold, though he showed no signs of frostbite. He merely became confused and then unconscious. Joseph Palmer did not freeze externally. He died of hypothermia, and the ground was too frozen to bury him. James Climatic, Diary, March 1826. On March 3rd, a terrible snowstorm with wind commenced the night before and continues with unrelenting violence. On March 4th, a man named Harrison went out to look for the horses and did not return. He was found about 100 yards from camp, frozen, after becoming disoriented in the blizzard. 100 yards, the length of a football field. Harrison stepped away from safety and never found his way back. Zenas Leonard, Narrative of the Adventures, winter of 1833 to 1834. We encountered frequent and extremely violent snowstorms. On December 25th, a storm lasted 3 days. We made no progress. 2 horses died. 1 man disappeared and was found dead about a quarter of a mile from camp. Another man, another short distance. In the diary, he is simply one of ours. That is how it worked. It was recorded and life moved on, because winter was not finished yet. Winter as a slow killer. The science of death. Now let's talk about how cold actually kills. Mild hypothermia, uncontrollable shivering, loss of fine motor coordination, hands unable to handle weapons or light a fire. Joe Meek wrote that his hands shook so badly he could not load his rifle. Moderate hypothermia, shivering stops, severe confusion, extreme drowsiness. Osborne Russell described a French trapper who attempted to remove his coat, feeling warm, and died in less than an hour. This is what we now call paradoxical undressing. And there was another fatal factor: moisture. Wet clothing accelerates heat loss dozens of times over. A dry man can survive temperatures far below zero. The same man, wet, can die above freezing. Hunger made everything worse. Extreme cold demands thousands of extra calories per day. But snow makes hunting difficult. Effort consumes energy. Without food, body temperature drops, the mind fails, and winter wins. Between 1820 and 1850, thousands of men worked as trappers and mountain-men in the Rocky Mountains. Historical estimates indicate that winter killed more men than hostile encounters, accidents, and disease combined. Most are not remembered by name. They appear only as a trapper, 2 men from the brigade, name unknown. Winter was not a season on the American frontier. It was a filter. Those who respected the cold, who prepared and followed its rules, survived. Those who did not became part of the snow. And when spring arrived, there was often nothing left to find, only empty camps and silence.